Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining the May 14th, 2020 Healthy Farms, Healthy Agriculture Community Conversation. Today's conversation continues the theme of the first series, which is talking about composting mortalities. We will take a quick look at the Healthy Farms, Healthy Agriculture website. Then we will have a conversation and some Q&A with Tommy Bass. And finally, we will show you some features of the forums that may be useful to you going forward. I'm Dr. Julie Smith, Research Associate Professor at the University of Vermont, and helping me lead this meeting is Joanna Cummings, Communication Professional, and behind the scenes is Eileen Christiansen, Project Budget Coordinator. For a little bit about my background, I've been engaged in preventative animal health programs, biosecurity education, and agricultural emergency preparedness since 2002. For the last 5 years, I've been the project director of a large multidisciplinary project studying the human behavioral components of agricultural biosecurity. The project team calls it the Animal Disease Biosecurity Coordinated Agricultural Project, or ADB CAP. If you want to find out more about the overall project and have an opportunity to listen to presentations given by project team members about a year ago, please visit the project website at agbiosecurityproject.org, and the link can be found in the chat box. As part of that project, I've been rethinking how to more effectively join forces with others who want to reduce the impact of new, emerging, or foreign animal diseases. What are the ways we can individually and together influence human decision-making in the context of taking action that contributes to the spread of pests and diseases, with the goal, of course, of slowing or stopping their spread? We've designed the new Healthy Farms, Healthy Agriculture website and forums with that aim in mind. I have a few logistical announcements before we go any further. Please be aware that this meeting is being recorded and the chat will be saved. To improve the meeting experience for everyone, please leave your microphone muted unless you're invited to unmute it, and turn your webcam off unless you are asking a question aloud or are a member of the team. Nevertheless, I will be encouraging your participation in the chat, and I'll be sharing some tips on ways you can customize your experience with this Zoom meeting to help out those with less experience with Zoom. For starters, I'd like to invite you to enter in the chat box what state you work in most of the time and briefly what you do. To open the chat, go to the menu at the bottom of your Zoom window and click on the chat icon. If you are in full screen mode, the chat box will float. If you want to get out of full screen mode and you are in the Zoom desktop app, you can exit full screen mode by toggling the mode icon in the upper right corner of your Zoom window. Then the chat box will merge with the right side of the Zoom window. Let's see what geographic representation we have on the meeting today. Our record so far has been having 42 states represented. Looks like we've got a pretty diverse group with us today as well. Zoom also accommodates polls, although these won't be visible in the recording. When you registered, you were asked to select what type of work you do. So that I can share that information anonymously with everyone participating today, I would like you to answer the same question here in the poll. You can select as many of the items as apply to your job responsibilities. So the poll should be visible for you, and just select what your job responsibilities are. It looks like most people have had a chance to reply, so let's take a look at the responses. And I think we'll find, as with most of our meetings, that we've got a pretty even split between folks with an extension background or with regulatory responsibilities, and then a few folks who do other things as well. Why have we designed the Healthy Farms, Healthy Agriculture, or HFHA, community conversations in this web meeting format with an accompanying forum? Well, to facilitate the sharing of information, stories, and encouragement among a select group of stakeholders. Our target audience is folks like yourselves who talk up biosecurity when interacting with farmers, ranchers, or smallholders with livestock or poultry. We view you as part of a community of practice. What I mean by that is a group of people who share a concern, a set of problems, or a passion about a topic and want to deepen their knowledge and expertise in this area by interacting on an ongoing basis. For some of you, the topic you want to connect around is mortality composting. For others, it may be biosecurity or disease prevention and control more broadly. We want to build connections among those in this biosecurity community who share interests by providing access to expertise and by facilitating ongoing conversations in an online forum. I want to pause here just a moment to check in with you about your reason for being here today. If you don't mind, again, sharing your response in the chat box, I'd like to know what you are hoping to accomplish by joining the conversation today. What do you hope to accomplish by being part of this HFHA biosecurity conversation and this community? And you'll be able to see others' responses there as well. While your responses are coming in, I'd like to review the plan for today's meeting. Now that we've introduced ourselves, it's time for a quick, oh, sorry. Yeah, now that we've introduced ourselves, it's time for a quick tour of the HFHA website. That will be followed by a conversation with our featured speaker, and then a visit to the forums to go over how to continue the conversation there. Joanna Cummings, who is responsible for designing and developing the all-new Healthy Farms, Healthy Agriculture website, is going to give us a quick overview. Joanna, take it away.
Hi everyone, thanks for attending today. I will keep this brief and we will give you the URL for the website so that you can go and take a tour on your own. This is the Healthy Farms, Healthy website, Livestock Biosecurity website. It's directed towards small farm producers across the US. Also, we have information that would be helpful for veterinarians, service providers, and youth in learning about biosecurity. So we're looking at the home page. I'm going to quickly hover over 3 of the navigation elements just so you can see the focus of the website is on 3 terms we call prevent, detect, and respond. Prevention of livestock disease, detection and diagnostics for livestock disease outbreaks, and then what the response would be if you actually do have an outbreak on your farm. And so you can see we're heavily weighing on the prevent activities. We also have other resources, including biosecurity planning tools. We are going to be launching some youth education learning modules, and we have a lot of other good information as well. So please visit healthyagriculture.org.
Thank you, Joanna. It's time for the next Zoom meeting tip. Unless you're in the browser version of Zoom, you can control whether your view is speaker view or gallery view. Near the upper right corner of the Zoom window is a boxy icon that's either labeled speaker view or gallery view. The label tells you what you will get when you click on the icon. Speaker view will enlarge the video of whomever is speaking or whoever's audio is picking up, unless they're sharing other content, and will highlight whomever's microphone is active. Gallery view shows all participants, and you can change views at any time. Okay. Next up is our featured speaker. I will lead a moderated conversation for about 15 minutes, then check the chat for questions and comments that have been posted along the way. If you would rather speak than type your question, please type hand in the chat box. It's my pleasure to have joining us Tommy Bass, who is with Montana State University. He is affiliated with both the campus department and the extension program in animal and range sciences. He has a bachelor's degree in animal science, master's degree in agricultural education, and is close to completing his PhD in ecology and environmental science. I've appreciated his willingness to lend his expertise to the ADB CAP the past 5 years. Some of you may be familiar with the Livestock and Poultry Environmental Learning Center and E-Extension COP. Tommy has actively supported that effort. Mortality composting is just one topic that the LPELC has covered with webinars and extension materials. Tommy has direct experience with supporting farmers and ranchers with the development of plans and carrying out those plans when it comes to mortality composting, including in emergency situations. So I've invited him to share some stories from that experience with you. Tommy, thank you for being part of the HFHA community conversation.
Thank you, Julie, and everybody. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'd like to start out by asking you to share how you became a proponent of composting mortalities and how you approach producers with the concept.
Yeah, well, there was a few practical experiences early on in my life. In high school and college, I worked for a large animal veterinarian, and then I, as an animal science student, worked on our research dairy and research hog farm at the University of Georgia, my undergrad alma mater, and just began to see some very practical and efficient ways to deal with mortalities over the other options, burial, or we had loss of rendering, as many regions of the country have. So there's a practicality to it that was recognized early. And then when I approach producers, really, I sort of see if they might have the same sort of interest that I have, and then I can start to promote some of the other benefits that essentially it's done above ground, so you're not creating any sort of legacy in the soil or on the property by having an old burial pit. It's essentially temporary. You can run it on an area, a piece of ground, for a few weeks, for a season, for a couple years, but you can clean it up. You can remove that finished beneficial material, use it somewhere else on the operation, and that piece of ground is not, forever on top of a burial pit, for example. I keep going back to that. Certainly, there are biosecurity benefits, right? So a lot of what I've sort of just been mentioning is more in the realm of your routine mortalities. But even then, it doesn't hurt to have a method of mortality management that can be a pathogen reduction method. A little anecdote real quick from back home. When I worked for UGA Extension, I would get phone calls from developers digging basements for subdivisions outside Gainesville, Georgia, and they had dug into 20, 30-year-old dead bird pits. And there's research that shows there's even salmonella present in some of these decades-old pits.
Wow. Well, in previous conversations, we heard about how emergencies from lightning strikes to highly contagious diseases can lead to mass animal mortalities that can be managed with composting. I'm curious, what are some composting experiences you'd like to share?
Yeah, well, speaking from my new home and position on the Northern Rockies and edge of the upper Great Plains, the last few years we've had some different storms in the region that came on early, heavy, wet, fast, cold snowstorms, say in October. And this is a situation where a lot of range cattle aren't pulled in closer to home yet necessarily, or they may be on their winter range, but just to get hit hard with such a tough storm. So basically, we ended up with a situation of mortalities out across range and pasture scenarios. And by the time this early snow melted, before the true winter even, you couldn't move the carcasses, right? They had started to decompose to a point. So we tried to push them together in place as much as possible and then compost out where they fell, basically. So that was sort of emergency composting to deal with the carcasses that were scattered out about the landscape. We couldn't bring them in for the best ideal situation of composting at an organized site. So it was taking the carbon material out to the emergency and dealing with those cattle right there. In a similar situation a few years ago, I consulted on actually a stampede where cattle had stampeded and run into a coulee. Some were injured, many were suffocated. And once again, it was far away from the ranch headquarters, but we were able to bring some carbon out and deal with the mortalities there. So they were broken down, and then by the time spring runoff came around, we weren't having residual mortalities washing into waterways.
Tommy, related to what you said about the experience with the blizzard and deaths out on the range, how does severe cold influence compost management and performance?
Yeah, well, our neighboring colleagues up in Canada, in Alberta, and out of the Lethbridge Experiment Station, have published a lot on this. And then at our own Northern Ag Research Center in Havre, Montana, which is essentially on the Canadian border, we've had great success with composting through severe cold. As an example, calving losses occurring in February, late February, early March, when we start calving, it's still winter. We were able to start windrows with lost calves and some lost mother cows. Within a week of building those piles, we were recording temperatures of 130 to 155 degrees at 18 and 36 inches in those piles. And there was literally 2 to 3 inches of snow on top of the pile. So basically 18 inches away from the core of this pile, which was over 130 degrees, we had a blanket of snow on top. There are some practical tips. If you can retrieve the carcass and bring it to your composting area before it freezes, then it is much easier to get things going. And if you have some warm feedstock, so some compost stockpiled that's generating some of its own heat, or perhaps some silage that's also generating its own heat, you can use that to pack around the core of your compost pile before you put on a clean carbon cap. And yeah, those warm materials, those ready to go biologically active materials, help you fight that temperature gradient to get your productive temperatures going sooner.
What other challenges do you face, Tommy, in the high plains and mountains region when it comes to setting up an effective pile?
So one thing that's different about mortality composting is you're looking at efficient, lower labor management. So you're not turning it and managing it like you would a commercial compost product of another waste. However, many times after that initial weeks to a few months static period, you do need to turn it, and we find we have to irrigate because of our arid, higher elevation, conditions. So to really get that compost finished, you have to add a little water back to it. So that's an environmental concern. On the flip side, we don't have to deal with a lot of runoff issues or overwet compost, which makes management easier in some ways relative to the Southeast, Midwest, or Pacific Northwest.
How about scavengers or other animals disturbing piles? Are there particular animals that are of concern with mortality management where you are?
Well, certainly the exciting stories for folks over in the northern Rocky Mountain front, anything they do with mortality management, feed, calving, large apex predators are a concern, so grizzly bears. And certainly down around even my part of Montana and near the Yellowstone region, grizzly bears, less concerned with wolves. So those are the exciting answers. But in general, anybody managing mortality compost across the United States, you want to do a good job with a good, clean, well-maintained carbon cap. So I'm talking about a number of inches of clean carbon material to act as a biofilter. And then you can avoid all the common sort of scavenger and nuisance animals. Reduces their curiosity and ability to smell that mortality immensely. So that would be skunks and rodents, a variety of birds or nuisance insects, even farm and ranch dogs that are, living on the place. We also know we have coyotes across the United States from suburban to rural environments. So basically it comes down to good management to prevent all of those common scavengers. Certainly if we were composting mortalities in a disease scenario, we do not want those piles disturbed until the process and heat cycles run their courses. So reducing that nuisance animal scavenger situation is very important, so as not to disturb and spread those carcasses.
Tommy, are there any composting projects you're involved in currently, or do you have coming up? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, I'll start with something a little more, I guess, less culturally significant at the moment. I recently finished up working with an individual landowner who had elected to compost her favorite old mare that she had to. She and her husband are retired large acreage farmers, but their sort of retirement place is amenity property with shallow groundwater, and so they couldn't bury this old mare on site at their retirement hobby ranch. And she actually contacted me and was quite interested in being able to have her horse put down on site, compost her, maybe have a little memorial, just burying some small residual bones. And then she incorporated the rest of the compost into her garden. Mm-hmm. So that was an interesting solution to a common problem we have around here with when horses have to put down on small acreage hobby farms and ranches. They often can't be buried. But on a more serious and contemporary note, I've been working with state agencies and commodity associations to determine some mortality management options leaning towards composting in the case that we have to depopulate and then euthanize animals, healthy animals, because of bottlenecks in the supply chain. So this is an ongoing discussion across the country because of the closure of meat plants and reduced capacity because of labor illness within the plant. And we have systems, particularly hog production, it's hard to slow down once they're churning. And there's the real reality of healthy surplus animals that will have nowhere to go except to be euthanized.
So, Tommy, my last question before I take a look at the chat box, I'm hoping that you can share some important lessons that you've learned with assisting with composting mortalities, where biosecurity for animal or human health concerns was a really important consideration.
Yeah, and I'll reflect that back to my own behavior in a certain situation, and also how training and workshops and even exercises are so important. So in 2015, I actually was working as a volunteer subject matter expert in the Midwest during high pathogenic avian influenza. And really just having to focus on following the guidelines related to site and regional poultry complex security and biosecurity as we as technical service providers moved around the environment, and then the actual PPE process on site, donning and doffing, crossing the clean line, just really having to focus on all of those procedures and not letting your guard down, right? And all of that was so that we were not vectors or our equipment were not fomites as we're trying to deal with this disease. And of course, I was consulting on the mass mortality management. And then second to that, because it was a disease situation, that the construction of the compost piles and windrows being done properly was much more important, because we had to make the conditions that would drive the temperatures that would reduce and kill that pathogen. So, in that case, how we conducted our business and then how we built, managed, and monitored the piles, all of that was done with biosecurity as the ultimate, proper biosecurity is the ultimate outcome.
Great, thanks for that, Tommy. I'm going to turn to the chat box. It looks like a number of questions have come in, and we'll get through as many of these as we can. And some of these, in addition to any that we don't get to, we'll just shift them over to the forums where Tommy and others can help address them. So the first question that came in is from Rob Mickness, and he wants to find out a little more about how you moved carcasses in the field.
Yeah, so perhaps he's asking about the situation from the blizzard. Just tried to get tractors and equipment out because there were a number of days there in that early snowstorm where it took to melt out, and then there was residual mud. The reports I got back from producers doing it was kind of messy. It was a lot of pushing and pulling in that case, but you couldn't pick up the carcasses anymore because they were already that decomposed. So elbow grease, light to medium equipment, and pushing and pulling in that example. Otherwise, in a more managed, non-emergency situation, medium equipment, loaders, tractors with forks, and then even chaining and dragging carcasses in certain situations. Obviously, the smaller the carcass, the easier the management from that standpoint is.
Tommy, we have a question from Joanna Cummings here about the carbon sources that you use for composting. So here in the Northeast, we have easy access to wood chips and a number of wood products. What are the main carbon sources that you can rely on where you are?
Right, so these are questions we've been asking recently with some of our hog production out on the high plains. Without getting too technical, straw is not the most preferred carbon co-composting material. And certainly out on the high plains, you are further away from timber industries. But we have still found luck with harvesting some other materials from the farms, manure solids, spoiled feed, some things like that. We have some areas where we've been able to get silage from feedlots or dairies, maybe if it was to move to a hog composting operation. And then we do use that straw as a final clean carbon cap. Biofilter, it provides warmth to drive those temperatures. But in the ideal world, you'd be working with a variety of different grains or coarsenesses of timber waste, wood waste. I will mention in Minnesota during the avian influenza outbreak, we were trying to get wood shavings from any municipality that had a leaf and lawn collection program. So that was a source even on sort of the prairies of Minnesota. And then commercial landscape companies, but that got expensive. And then finally out there on the high plains and prairies, some people started pruning and cutting into their windbreaks to generate the carbon material. We've also had some folks harvest some invasive woody species to generate wood chips. So invasive woody species growing along creeks and rivers on the plains. It's an opportunity to do that conservation work and get the carbon you need for composting.
So another question just came in related to that in terms of, maybe a facility that has mortalities doesn't have all the carbon sources they need. Do you recommend that people build relationships with folks that could provide carbon sources in the event of an emergency in advance, like as a preparedness step?
I do, and I will mention that a conversation I'm monitoring elsewhere right now, folks are doing just that in the event that these healthy animals have to be euthanized right now due to COVID-19 related bottlenecks. So State departments of agriculture, state departments of livestock are working with extension, local and regional levels to inventory the carbon sources if this potential disaster comes to fruition. Obviously, in other situations, yeah, you're playing catch up. So really, this is something that like local emergency management groups that have an ESF 11 or Ag Emergency Annex and Committee could be doing proactively to think about where those carbon sources are for potential future emergencies.
So Tommy, you said if you do things right, the pile will be nice and warm in the middle and can be cold on the outside. And Deb Grantham noted that she has seen in backyard composting that animals will get in there to get warm. Do you have any challenges with that? Do animals burrow in to get where it's warm?
Yes, I have one one shame on my consulting record along those lines. And I had a client that I was helping with the mortality composting scenario, and they had a skunk, unfortunately, that just became habituated to messing around with that pile. Eventually, the skunk had to be trapped and removed. But generally, when you have enough carbon covering, we have just not observed in our demonstrated research and then composting on private farms and ranches, the rodents are burrowing animals. We've seen, at least in my experience, a lot more birds being curious. And I think a lot of times they start digging around because of residual seeds or bugs in the carbon source. And then as they get more curious, they might actually get down closer to whatever the material is you're composting.
Tommy, I've been having some conversations with folks about extending what I've done in biosecurity focus on animals to incorporate plant biosecurity interests. And there's really much broader ways of thinking about biosecurity. And a question came in that's related to some aspects that it gets into the whole, a bigger question about management of manure and compost, and not just spreading organisms that can cause disease to animals, but potentially spreading things that are problematic to the plants and the crops. And a question came in from Doris Olander about concerns about plant biosecurity measures, and maybe, I'm not sure exactly if she's thinking about weed seeds or other types of invasives that could come in if you're bringing in carbon sources or even having to borrow heavy equipment to perform composting.
Yeah, I think that's a great question and a great plant for some quick discussion. There are a couple different issues. In general, I recommend trying to source materials as locally as possible to reduce the chance of bringing in something, whether it be a plant disease pathogen or a weed that's prevalent in another county or state, but is not in, the place where you want to compost. So just trying to stay as local as possible, and then consider if there could be any sort of contamination of imported carbon sources. Something else with composting in general, you can reduce, if not eliminate, the viability of many weed seeds, both through temperature and through just the biological digestion going on that can damage seed coats and make seeds susceptible or vulnerable where they won't propagate properly. And then certainly temperature sterilization too. We're talking about, upwards of 150 degrees in many cases. So I think just a variety of best practices like we think about when shipping hay, cleaning equipment before it leaves an area that's under similar sort of biosecurity consideration or management. Out here in the West, particularly, there's boat check and wash stations everywhere. So, even our recreational folks and general public are sort of trained in these concepts. But the same goes for farm and ranch equipment, cleaning between operations and moving region to region, county to county.
Another question just came in regarding environmental issues and I guess regulations related to composting. What are the typical regulations up your way?
Well, I will mention that this is a difficult topic to talk about because it can be so different. And it might be at the state level or it might be at the county level with the county sanitarian. But generally what we've experienced in Montana is our state environmental agency, our Montana DEQ, they essentially promote composting. They're very helpful in the management of routine composting and weighing in during emergency composting. In fact, they are one of the state agencies that I'm in communications with right now as we're developing the potential mass mortality composting plan related to the bottlenecks in meat processing. Mostly you're looking at some sort of site management to prevent runoff from the compost site into surface waters or leaching of any excess moisture into groundwater. So, there are siting considerations that we could have whole nother webinar on. But that is where, say, environmental agencies at the state or local level might come into play.
Thanks, Tommy. Another question came in, and I'd like to get your perspective on whether you've managed or how you address mortalities that would be in a euthanasia situation where an overdose of barbiturates was used.
Yeah, so, well, I'll mention, for example, the horse anecdote that I told earlier. We actually found somebody who was willing to dispatch the animal with precise gunshot using the coordinates recommended by the AVMA to avoid that barbiturate situation. Josh Payne, before he left his academic position, had done research out of Oklahoma State University and published on barbiturate residues in compost after euthanizing horses. And a group out of Cornell and Jean Bonhotel and another group are still working and publishing in that area. I will say there are barbiturate residues that can be detected in varying degrees in the compost or in the soil. Thanks, Deb. She put up the reference to Jean. It's still a concern and a question. Whether there is efficacy of the remaining dose that is now in the environment is known. Obviously, would be a concern of birds or scavengers that may be exposed to that material in the environment in the future being killed. And there certainly would be significant other legal implications if endangered species like bald eagles and such were exposed to barbiturates in the environment. So at this point, yeah, that's the scenario. We know there are some residues, but I've not followed the literature in the last few months to know if this efficacy question has been answered.
Mm-hmm. I think that's where current research is focused, right? So another question came in that I didn't see when we were talking about composting amendments and materials earlier, and I'm going to reframe it a little bit for you here. And the question was related to wetness and dryness, old or new, wood or wood chips. And so can you tell us a little bit about how you put together the moisture of what you're using so you get the right moisture in the whole pile?
No, that's fine. And I will try to be brief because once again, this is another interesting expanded topic. One thing that's a little different with carcass composting, whether it's a bunch of small carcasses or one or two large carcasses, is we have this mass of nutrient, protein, mineral, and water, right? And so you build the pile, you have an 18-inch coarse wood chip base, maybe 24-inch. It allows good passive aeration. You have your mortality, maybe you have some finer material around it, and 12 or 18 inches, and then another 18-inch to 24-inch clean cap. You have a lot of carbon material. Much of it could be pretty dry related to this mass of very wet material. You start out like this, it's unmixed, and so you have a big moisture release in the first few days. And you'll have pockets of anaerobic rotting breakdown before you sort of start to hit some natural composting, aerobic composting equilibrium. So it's a lot different than strict water management can be in other composting scenarios. I find that moist but not sopping wet sawdust to medium wood chips is ideal. Really, it's just from anecdotal experience and then discussing with other compost practitioners or researchers. You know, your more dry stuff for the coarse base is just fine, but to have some moisture to help drive that process near the core, you know, we like to see something, we call it using the fist test, where you are squeezing active ongoing compost or your sawdust. You want to feel some moisture in a fistful without expressing free water. So that can be just a pretty ideal scenario. So a stockpile of medium wood chips, shavings, or sawdust that maybe's been rained on a little bit but isn't soaking wet. It's also not 3 years old at the end of the summer. That's kind of the perfect moisture to go with.
Great. Thanks so much, Tommy, for sharing your experience and answering those questions. We're right about the spot where we need to be to go on and take a peek at the forums.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. So we're going to get a home screen up there for you, and I'm going to just explain a bit about the forums before we check them out. You may be wondering, why did we set them up? Well, we set them up as a way to facilitate sharing among those with more experience and those with less. Obviously, until we can mind meld, we have to use other means to ensure that those coming after us can learn from our experience. These forums are designed to allow the exchange of stories and information on biosecurity related topics, and they're private to those who have registered for the forums. You have to be registered to see the conversations in these forums. Why might you participate in these forums? Well, we hope that there's something of value from participating, whether it's getting questions answered or helping answer others' questions. We envision these interactions leading to collaborative opportunities, easy access to expert resources, and encouragement as you raise biosecurity awareness in any number of contexts. But the bottom line is, it's your participation that will drive what the forums do, what they look like, how they evolve. And Joanna and I will be doing our best to adapt the forums to your needs. So I also want to give you a chance to know a little bit about the research going on associated with the forums. And this research is being led by Danielle Farley, who's working on her master's degree with Joel Iverson at the University of Montana. So I'm going to invite Danielle to briefly introduce herself and the goals of the research. So Danielle, if you'd go ahead and unmute.
Hello, everyone. So we are working to understand how people communicate and engage with each other around biosecurity concerns, like Julie has been saying. And by looking at the questions asked and engagement on the forums and during the community conversations such as this one, we hope to create knowledge sharing spaces for folks to share information about biosecurity and opportunities for people to connect with others. So going forward, I will be looking for people to interview who are interested in sharing their mortality compost story or biosecurity story and giving feedback on the use of the forums. So we're looking to populate some information on the forums webpage to have it available and shareable. So feel free to message me if you are interested in participating. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, Danielle. So let's now take a look at how the forums are laid out. We're going to get to the home page of the forums in a moment. And I want you to know that right now there's one active forum, which is about mortality composting. And there's a placeholder for the forum that goes with our planned community conversation series this fall. The forum space is actually organized into categories shown by the blue bars here. And within categories are forums, which show up as hot links. Within forums are topics. And there can be any number of topics within a forum. And by replying to topics or creating new ones, you contribute to the conversation. Now I want to make sure that you see the subscribe button. You can click on the subscribe button to get notifications of new posts within a forum or a topic. But make sure that you're logged in when you go to follow that link so that you can get right to the new activity in the forums. And make sure you log in. You may, when you register for the forums, you'll get a couple messages back, and there's going to be one that gives you your initial login credentials. Make sure you log in to activate your membership and subscribe, and then you'll get a notification in your email if there's something that you might want to come back and take a look at. Right now, we've populated the Mortality Composting Forum with topics to help members get to know each other and share their experiences. And when you're in a topic, to reply, you use the text box below the previous replies. If you want to reply directly to someone's reply to a topic, then you click on the reply link in the colored bar above that reply that you want to respond to, and then you'll be building a thread within a topic. So we built a topic with questions and comments related to our April 23rd community conversation with Mark Hutchinson, and we'll be doing the same following today's conversation with Tommy Bass. So just remember to contribute to the conversation. All you have to do is register for the forums, log in, and reply to a topic or a reply within a topic. Right now, anyone who registers can see all of the topics within the Mortality Composting Forum. However, there is a way to restrict access to particular forums to members of a group. Let's say you are leading a training about a particular biosecurity related topic, and you would like to track the success of those who completed the training and be able to share those successes among the cohort who attended the training. We can set up a category specifically for such a group, and within that category, you would be able to develop forums and then topics that are specific to that group. And just members of the group, those associated with the training, would be able to access forums within that category. Does that make sense? Are there any questions about creating or navigating within forums? I'm happy to clarify anything now or later. So a link to register or log in can be found in the chat box. And I'm just reminding you again, once you receive your login credentials, you need to log in to activate your profile. And then contribute or subscribe to forums or topics. I recommend customizing your profile after you log in the first time. And like most forums, there are social features within it, like making friends. And that's all optional, right? You don't have to use those features to contribute to the conversation. So take some time to familiarize yourself about how things work, try things out. Don't be afraid of making a mistake. If you end up posting something that you don't think is right or don't think is in the right place, reach out to me or Joanna and we can help fix it. And if you're not sure how to do something, you can check out the forum's member guide, which explains more about profile options, customizing your profile, and other features of the forums. So I see a question from Deb Grantham. Once logged in, can you start a new forum? You can. I would suggest reaching out to us first because we'll want to think through a little bit about what are the topics that are going to go into that. And we just want to make sure that we're keeping things organized and helping direct people to that forum from the website. But we're happy to work with people who want to set up new forums. So we have a few more questions for you. So we have a poll. So the first poll we're bringing up is about how likely are you to visit the forums after today's web meeting? Now we know some folks have already registered for the forum. Some people have been in there contributing. So for those who haven't made the jump yet, how likely are you to do it after today's web meeting? See how our responses are coming in. Okay, great. Thank you for that. We're going to move on to the next poll. In the next poll, we're asking about ways in which you might engage with the forums. And you can select as many of the options as apply. Would you engage to share your own story, to find stories from others' experiences, to access technical assistance, to learn about more topics you're interested in, or to be part of a community interested in biosecurity? You can select as many of these as apply to your own interests. If you have other ideas about why you might participate or what you'd find useful, you can type them in the chat box or email them to me or Joanna later. And Joanna's and my emails are in the chat box. So why don't we share the results of that poll while I'm wrapping things up here. As I mentioned, we can set up forums that are of interest to you for other groups. And we do have a placeholder for one on youth biosecurity education that we will be activating this fall with a series of web conversations like this. So the goal of these meetings is to stimulate conversations related to helping, of the fall meetings will be related to helping youth understand and implement biosecurity. So we're going to pull up our closing slide because we're almost at the end of our time today. Thanks for joining us and helping to get the Healthy Farms, Healthy Agriculture community conversations and biosecurity forums started. I'd like you to continue being part of the conversation. Together, we can enhance the capacity of all involved in the biosecurity community. We're building capacity to more effectively engage production level stakeholders in implementing appropriate biosecurity practices. After you sign out, would you take a moment to tell us what you thought of today's web meeting and what we showed you today? There's a link to a Google form in the chat box and on the slide. Feedback is a gift, and we appreciate yours. Thank you again for joining this Healthy Farms, Healthy Agriculture community conversation. While the focus of this project is biosecurity and agriculture, I hope you are remaining committed to flattening the COVID-19 curve in your part of the country and staying safe. Until next time, be well and biosecure.